I had seen him before, sitting at the same spot near the grand entrance of the city's most luxurious shopping mall. His clothes were torn, his hair unkempt, and his hands rough with scars of a life that had clearly not been kind. I never gave him a second thought. Why would I? I was successful, a self-made millionaire. Everything I had, I earned. Every suit I wore, tailored to perfection, every watch on my wrist, a symbol of time well spent on making money. The world belonged to men like me, the powerful, the relentless, the untouchable. That evening, as I stepped out of my car, the valet nodding with the respect I was accustomed to, I saw him again, sitting on a piece of cardboard, his head slightly tilted down, as if the weight of the world had finally crushed him. As I passed by, he lifted his head, his eyes meeting mine. "Sir, could you spare some change?" "Even just a meal?" His voice was tired, cracked, like an old record barely able to play a tune. I stopped, staring at him. A meal? That was it? The thought amused me. Here I was, a man who spent more on a single dinner than what he probably needed to survive a week, and yet I felt nothing but indifference. "You want a meal?" I asked, my tone laced with condescension. "And what will you do after that? Sit here again tomorrow? Beg again? What's the point?" His lips parted slightly as if he wanted to say something, but no words came out. "People like me," I continued, "we worked for what we have. I didn't sit on a sidewalk hoping the world would take pity on me. I built something. Maybe instead of begging, you should try doing the same." I didn't wait for a response. I didn't care for one. I adjusted my cuffs, straightened my posture, and walked past him, entering the dazzling golden-lit lobby of the mall where men like me belonged. As I walked away, I heard his voice, softer this time, almost to himself. One day things might change? I scoffed. Change? Not for people like him. The world wasn't built for the weak. It was built for men like me, the strong, the ones who take. Little did I know that night the universe had already started writing my downfall. I wasn't always like this. There was a time when I had a home, a family, a purpose. I had a job, a small but decent apartment, and a wife who loved me. Life was simple, but it was good. I never thought I'd end up here, on the streets, invisible to the world, a man people walk past like a forgotten piece of trash. It all started with a single misfortune. I worked as a mechanic, fixing cars in a small garage just outside the city. It wasn't glamorous, but I was good at it. My hands knew the language of engines, the rhythm of a well-tuned machine. Then, one day, the garage shut down. The owner, a good man, said he had no choice. Business was bad, expenses were high, and he couldn't keep paying us. Losing that job was like watching the first domino fall. I searched for work everywhere. I knocked on doors, filled out applications, asked old friends. Nothing. The world had moved on and it no longer had a place for me. My wife tried to hold us together, working extra shifts at a diner, but the bills kept piling up. Then she got sick. At first, it was just fatigue, something she brushed off with a tired smile. But soon, it became worse. Hospital visits, tests, prescriptions we couldn't afford. I remember sitting beside her, watching the light in her eyes fade with every passing day. I sold everything, my tools, my wedding ring, even the old watch my father had given me. Nothing was enough. The landlord wanted rent. The pharmacy wanted money. The world didn't care about our struggle. And then, one morning, she was gone. I held her hand as it grew cold, her last words a whispered apology. For what? I still don't know. Maybe for leaving me alone. Maybe for not being strong enough to fight any longer. After that, I lost everything. The apartment. What little dignity I had left. When you have nothing, the world treats you like nothing. At first, I still believed things would turn around. I told myself, just one break, one lucky moment, and I can rebuild. But that moment never came. Days turned into weeks, then months. Sleeping in doorways, searching trash bins for leftovers, feeling my body grow weaker with every skipped meal. People looked at me like I was less than human. Some pitied me, others ignored me completely. But the worst were the ones like him, the man in the expensive suit, the one who sneered at me like I had chosen this life. He saw a beggar. He didn't see the man I used to be, the husband, the worker, the person who once had dreams. But maybe none of that mattered anymore. It started with something small, something so insignificant that I barely noticed. A delayed payment, a minor dip in my investments, a call from my accountant mentioning a few numbers that didn't add up quite right. I shrugged it off. Business had its ups and downs, but I was always in control. Then the dips became crashes. One morning, I woke up to flashing red numbers on my phone screen. The stock market had taken a hit and my investments were bleeding. Millions gone overnight. I called my broker demanding answers, but all I got were empty reassurances. "It's just temporary," he said. "Things will bounce back." They didn't. In the weeks that followed, everything spiraled. My company faced lawsuits. A deal I had been counting on fell through at the last second. Banks that once welcomed me with open arms now sent cold, formal notices. Debts I had ignored suddenly became urgent. I still told myself I was untouchable. I had been through tough times before. This was just another storm to weather. But then the real losses started. The penthouse, gone. The luxury car, repossessed. The friends, the ones who used to toast my success at high-end restaurants, stopped calling. My business partners, men who once begged to work with me, now avoided me like a disease. And then came the worst blow. I had always believed that money commanded respect, that power kept people loyal. But when I needed them most, I learned the truth. My own assistant, who had worked for me for years, handed in her resignation with nothing more than a polite nod. My driver, the man who had driven me around like royalty, took a job somewhere else without a second thought. One by one, the people in my life disappeared, until I was alone. I remember sitting in my nearly empty apartment, the last place I could afford, before they took even that away. The walls felt smaller, the silence heavier. I picked up my phone, scrolling through my contacts, searching for someone, anyone who could help. No one answered, no one cared. I had spent years looking down on people like that beggar, believing they were nothing more than a burden to society. But now, sitting in the dark, the weight of failure pressing down on me, I felt something I had never felt before. Fear. True, gut-wrenching fear. For the first time in my life, I saw what it was like to be on the other side, and I wasn't sure I could survive it. I sat on the cold steps of a building I once walked past without a second glance. My clothes, once tailored to perfection, were now wrinkled and stained. My watch, one of the last things I had held on to, was gone, sold for a few nights in a cheap motel, and a handful of meals that didn't last long enough. The world moved past me, the same way I had once moved past others. People avoided my gaze. Some looked at me with pity, others with disgust. I had become the very thing I used to mock. The hunger gnawed at me. The city air felt colder than I remembered. My hands trembled, not just from the chill, but from the weight of what I had lost. Then I heard the voice, deep, confident, familiar. "Yo, what happened to you, man?" I looked up, and there he was, Big Shaq. Not just a name, not just a celebrity. The man was a legend, a giant in every way, physically, financially, and in spirit. I had seen him before, of course. Everyone had. A basketball champion, a businessman, a philanthropist. But seeing him now, standing in front of me, looking at me like I was a person and not just another piece of city trash, it shook me. I swallowed hard, ashamed of what I had become. "Life happened," I muttered, my voice barely above a whisper. He studied me for a moment, then sat down beside me, right there on the steps. People passing by slowed, confused at the sight. A man like him sitting next to someone like me. It didn't make sense. "Let me guess," he said, resting his massive hands on his knees. "You had everything. Money, power, respect. Thought you were untouchable." I exhaled sharply, nodding. "And now," he continued, "you ain't got a damn thing." Another nod. He leaned back, looking up at the sky like he had seen this story 1,000 times before. "You remind me of someone I knew," he said. "A guy who thought money made him better than everyone else, thought he'd never fall. And when he did," he snapped his fingers, "no one was there to catch him." I lowered my gaze. "No one's here for me either." He chuckled, a deep, knowing laugh. "That's where you're wrong." I frowned, not understanding. "You still breathing, ain't you?" He tapped his chest. "Still got a heart in there? Then you got a second chance." I wanted to believe that. But how? I had burned every bridge, turned my back on the people who might have helped me. "You think your money made you powerful?" he asked. "Nah, man. Power ain't in a bank account. It's in what you do when you got nothing left." I stared at him, unsure of what to say. Then, to my shock, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick wad of cash. I stiffened. "I don't need," he held up a hand. "This ain't charity, it's a test." "A test?" "You take this and you use it to get back on your feet. Not for fancy suits, not for showing off. You use it to rebuild. But if you mess up, if you go back to who you were before, then you lost more than money. You lost yourself." I swallowed hard, staring at the cash. This was my moment, my chance to prove that I wasn't just the man I used to be, that I could be better. I took a deep breath and reached out. My hands trembled as I took the money. Not because of greed or desperation, but because of what it represented. Hope. A second chance, something I never thought I'd get. Big Shaq watched me carefully, his deep eyes searching mine for something. Maybe doubt, maybe hesitation, maybe a sign that I would waste this opportunity like so many others had before. But I wouldn't. I gripped the cash tightly and nodded. "I won't mess this up." He smiled, a small, approving nod. "Good. Now go do something with it." I didn't waste a second. The first thing I did was find a place to stay. Nothing fancy, just a small room where I could sleep without fear of being kicked out at dawn. Then I bought a few decent clothes, something presentable enough to walk into a business and not be turned away at the door. With what I had left, I started looking for work. It wasn't easy. The world didn't suddenly welcome me back with open arms just because I had some cash in my pocket. But this time, I wasn't looking for shortcuts. I wasn't chasing status. I just needed an honest job. And finally, I found one. A small garage on the outskirts of town, nothing big, nothing flashy, but it reminded me of who I used to be. The owner was an older man, skeptical of hiring someone with no home address, no real references, but I told him the truth, my fall, my mistakes, the lesson I had learned. He gave me a chance. Day by day, I rebuilt myself. The man I had once been, the arrogant, selfish businessman, was gone. In his place stood someone humbler, someone who understood what it meant to lose everything and fight to earn it back. Months passed. I saved every penny I could, determined to never go back to where I had been. And one day, when I finally had enough, I did something I never imagined I would do. I went back to that same street corner. and I found the beggar I had once turned away. His face was tired, his clothes even more tattered than before. He didn't recognize me at first, not in my clean clothes, not with the weight I had gained back. But when I knelt beside him and handed him a warm meal, his eyes widened. "It's you," he whispered. I nodded. "Yeah, it's me." He looked down at the food, then back at me. "Why?" I smiled. "Because someone once did the same for me." Tears welled in his eyes, the same way they had welled in mine when Big Shaq sat beside me that night. Life had come full circle. I wasn't rich anymore, I wasn't powerful, but for the first time in my life I understood what real wealth was, and this time I wouldn't waste it.